My name is Jake Mercer, 27 years old electrician out of Brooklyn, and this is the story of the most honest lie I've ever lived through. It was late. Silver Spoon Diner smelled like burnt coffee, and the overhead lights felt too bright for whatever was left of the night. I was on my third cup when Claire slid into the seat across from me. Not walked over, slid in, like her legs had simply stopped holding her up. Her eyes were red. Her hands weren't steady. When she leaned forward, her voice dropped so low I had to hold my breath to catch it. Jake, would you come to a wedding with me this weekend as my husband? I froze. Before I could speak, she was already standing, already backing away. Forget it. I'm sorry. I caught her hand. Does the fake husband get to dance with his wife? She laughed, just barely, but she didn't pull away. What happened at that wedding changed everything. And I mean everything, including the part where I stopped pretending. I told myself it was the coffee. Silver Spoon Diner had decent coffee, not great, not the kind worth crossing a borough for, but decent. That was the story I kept. A guy needs somewhere to sit after a long shift. A guy needs something hot and black after 8 hours pulling wire through walls that hadn't been touched since the 1970s. Silver Spoon was close. Silver Spoon was cheap, that was all. Except I kept coming back on days I didn't have a shift. Claire had been working the evening section for as long as I'd been coming in. She was the kind of person who made a room feel calmer just by moving through it, not loud about it, not performing it, just quietly present in a way that settled something in the air. She remembered I took my coffee black before I had to say it. She'd set the soup down on cold nights without me ordering it, just slid it over like it was obvious. She always put my phone on the left side of the table and my water on the right because somehow she'd noticed which hand I reached with first. I told myself that was just good service, that she did it for everyone. I never checked whether that was true. The night everything shifted, I almost didn't notice something was wrong. She came to my table with her order pad like always, but her hand wasn't right, a slight tremor when she clicked the pen. Her smile landed a half-second late the way smiles do when someone is working hard to produce them. Under the diner lights, I could see she'd put something over her eyes to hide the redness. It hadn't fully worked. You okay? I asked. That was all it took. She sat down across from me in the booth, still in her apron, and for a long moment she just looked at the table. Then she told me about Brett. 3 years. She'd given 3 years to someone named Brett had built the kind of quiet future in her head that people don't talk about out loud. The apartment, the routine, the version of herself that felt stable. Then Brett met Serena. Serena was polished in the way Claire wasn't trying to be successful in ways that were easy to measure. Brett left. He didn't make it complicated. That was almost worse. This weekend there was a wedding in Connecticut. Mutual friends. Brett and Serena would both be there. I can't walk in alone, Claire said. Her voice was flat in the way voices get when someone has already cried about something for so long it stopped producing tears. I can't let him see me like that. Like he was right to leave. I listened. I didn't say anything yet. Then she looked up at me. Jake. She said my name differently than she usually did, not the quick, familiar way from across the diner. Slower. Like she was deciding something while she said it. Would you come with me as my husband? The word landed strange. Not bad strange, just strange. Before I could process it, something shifted in her face, the kind of shift that happens when a person suddenly hears themselves. She started to stand. Forget it. I don't know why I said that. Forget it, I'm sorry. I reached across the table and caught her hand. She stopped. I kept my voice even. I didn't say no. Her eyes came back to mine. Does the fake husband, I said, get to dance with his wife? She laughed. It was small and a little broken, but it was real, the first real thing on her face all night. She didn't pull her hand away. Yeah, she said quietly. He gets to dance. I nodded. Then I'm in. I want to be honest about what I knew in that moment and what I told myself I knew. What I knew, Claire was hurting and I wanted to help her. That part was simple. What I told myself, this was a favor. A weekend. Two people building a cover story so she could walk into a room without flinching. Nothing more complicated than that. What I didn't say out loud, I had been finding reasons to sit in that diner for months. I had been watching her remember small things about me and pretending it didn't mean anything. I had kept my distance because she was someone who smiled at everyone for a living, and I didn't want to be the guy who mistook that for something personal. But I said yes, and I told myself it was just to help. We met twice that week at a coffee shop on Atlantic Avenue to get our story straight. We'd been married 6 months. We met when I came in to fix the electrical panel at Silver Spoon, which was almost true. The first time I actually came in, Claire had been arguing with the espresso machine hitting the side of it, with her palm muttering something under her breath. She hadn't noticed me standing in the doorway for a full 30 seconds. When I mentioned that detail while we were building the story, she went quiet. "You remember that?" "I have a good memory," I said. She looked at me for a moment like she was trying to figure out what that meant. I kept my face neutral and moved on to the next part of the story: how long we'd been together, where we'd gone on our first date, the kinds of things people ask at weddings. But something had shifted in the room and we both felt it. I was helping her build a fiction out of pieces of something real. Every detail we invented had a seam where the truth was showing through. I knew exactly which details those were because they were the ones I actually remembered, the things I'd filed away over months of telling myself I was just there for the coffee. The fake story and the real one were starting to look a lot alike. I didn't know what to do with that. So I did what I always do when something feels too large to name. I kept moving forward and waited to see what happened next. The venue was the kind of place that made you aware of your own posture. An old estate in Connecticut, white columns, ivy climbing the stone walls, the whole thing lit up warm and golden against the November gray. Claire had told me it was a nice wedding. She hadn't told me it was the kind of nice that made a Brooklyn electrician feel like he'd walked into a magazine spread. She noticed me taking it in when we stepped out of the car. "You good?" she asked. "Great," I said. "Completely at home." She laughed, a real one, the kind that loosened something in her shoulders and slipped her hand into mine. It was a practiced move, something we'd agreed on during our prep sessions. Hold hands when people are watching. Stay close. Make it look easy. Her hand fit into mine in a way I didn't expect. Warm. Steady despite everything. I made myself stop noticing that and walked her inside. The first person to find us was a woman named Dana. The bride's college roommate Claire had briefed me someone who had met Brett multiple times and would absolutely be watching. Dana came in fast, both arms out, eyes already scanning me before she'd finished hugging Claire. "This must be Jake," Dana said, pulling back to look at me with the particular intensity of someone who had heard about me and was now performing an audit. "That's me," I said. "Claire has told us so much about you." Dana's eyes moved between us. We didn't even know she was seeing someone and then suddenly married. We were shocked. Claire leaned into my side, easy and natural. "We kept it quiet. Jake's private." Dana looked at me. "How did you two actually meet? She's been vague." "I came in to fix the electrical panel at the diner where she works," I said. "She was fighting with the espresso machine when I walked in. Didn't notice me for about 30 seconds. Claire looked up at me. Something moved through her expression, quick, unguarded, before she reset it. "He stood there and watched, instead of saying anything," she told Dana, which I still think was rude. "I was curious how it was going to end," I said. Dana laughed and moved on. Claire's grip on my hand tightened for just a moment. I didn't say anything about it. I saw Brett exactly once before he saw us. He was across the room near the bar, tall, good-looking, in an effortless way, the kind of man who moves through formal events like he was designed for them. Serena was beside him, one hand resting on his arm, and she was exactly what Claire had described: put together, confident, the kind of polished that reads as permanent. Claire saw him at the same moment. I felt it in her hand before I saw it on her face, a small, involuntary tightening. Then she squared her shoulders in that quiet way she had, the way that cost her something she wasn't going to let show. "He's going to come over," she said under her breath. "Let him," I said. She looked at me sideways. I gave her nothing back but a calm face, and after a moment she nodded once. Brett made his way to us about 20 minutes later, Serena a half step behind. His eyes went to me first, a quick assessment, and then to Claire, and then back to me with a different kind of attention. "Claire." He leaned in for the social kiss, the kind that means nothing. "I didn't know you were bringing someone." "This is Jake," Claire said. "My husband." The word landed differently when she said it here in this room in front of him. Steadier than I expected. Brett put his hand out to me. Brett, good to meet you, man. I shook it. Jake, likewise. Serena smiled and said something polite. I said something polite back. The whole exchange lasted maybe 3 minutes, and then someone pulled Brett away toward another cluster of guests and they were gone. Claire exhaled beside me, long and quiet. You did great, I told her. So did you, she said, and then softer. Thank you. What I hadn't planned for was the part where people kept asking me about her. A cousin of the groom caught me at the bar while Claire was with Dana. He asked how long we'd been together, where we lived, whether we wanted kids. Standard wedding conversation. I gave him the answers we'd rehearsed. Then he asked what I loved most about her. I hadn't rehearsed that one. I heard myself answer before I'd made a decision to. She notices things, I said. Most people go through a room and they see the surface of it. Claire actually looks. She'll remember what you ordered 3 weeks ago, and she'll remember why you seemed off that particular day. She pays attention in a way that makes you feel like you're worth paying attention to. The cousin nodded like that was a reasonable thing to say. I picked up my drink and looked across the room to where Claire had just reappeared, laughing at something Dana had said, and I felt the specific discomfort of a man who has said something true in a context where he was supposed to be performing. I had not been performing. The slow song came after dinner. The lights dropped a degree warmer, the band shifted tempo, and couples began moving toward the floor. Claire turned to me, and I could see her working through whether to suggest it or leave it alone. I stood up and offered my hand. She took it. The floor was crowded enough that we had cover, sparse enough that we weren't invisible. She fit against me the way that felt less like choreography and more like something that had been waiting to settle into place. I put one hand at her back. She rested hers against my chest lightly, like she was feeling for something she wasn't ready to name. We moved slowly. I wasn't thinking about Brett anymore. I wasn't thinking about anyone watching. At some point, her head came to rest against my shoulder. Neither of us made a production of it. It just happened the way things do when people stop performing and start actually being somewhere. I held her a little closer. She didn't pull back. We stayed like that until the song ended and then stood there for a moment, after the music changed, neither of us moving first. We got back to Brooklyn a little after midnight. Claire's apartment was a third-floor walk-up in Carroll Gardens. Narrow staircase, warm light on the landing, the smell of old wood and the curry someone 2 floors down had cooked for dinner. She'd kicked off her heels in the car and was carrying them up the stairs in one hand. Inside, she didn't turn the overhead light on, just the lamp by the window. I have leftover Thai food, she said, from 2 days ago. I can't promise it's still good. I can't promise I care, I said. We sat on the kitchen floor with the containers between us, still in our dress clothes. She had taken out her hair and it fell loose around her shoulders, and she looked different from how she looked at the diner, different from how she looked at the wedding. Like a version of herself that didn't have anywhere to be. We talked. Not about the wedding, not about Brett, not about the story we'd built. We talked about real things, how she'd ended up waitressing when she'd once meant to study architecture, how I'd gotten into electrical work following my uncle's footsteps, the apartment she'd always wanted to have someday, the neighborhood I couldn't imagine leaving. At some point, she said quietly, not looking at me, the worst part wasn't losing him. The worst part was the feeling after. Like maybe he saw something I couldn't. Like maybe I wasn't enough and he just figured it out before I did. I set down the container I was holding. I've watched you work for months, I said. You take care of everyone in that room without making anyone feel managed. You notice when something's wrong with a stranger and you do something about it instead of looking away. You are so far from not enough that I don't know how to make that make sense to you. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, just full. I don't know which one of us moved first. I'm not sure it matters. When she kissed me, it wasn't the kind of kiss that asks a question. It was the kind that closes the distance on something that has been building for a long time without a name. We stayed on that kitchen floor for another hour, talking less and less, until the lamp made the only light and the rest of the city had gone quiet outside. I went home near 2 in the morning. Walking down the empty street, dress shirt untucked, I tried to locate the place where the pretending had stopped. I couldn't find it. I wasn't sure it had ever really started. The days after the wedding had a different quality than anything that had come before. Claire came by a job site one afternoon with coffee in a paper bag, walked up like it was nothing, stayed for 20 minutes while I ate on a stack of drywall, then left with a wave over her shoulder. I waited outside Silver Spoon one night after her close, and we walked 6 blocks to nowhere in particular, and then back. We didn't label any of it. We didn't need to yet. It existed in the space before language, and for a little while that was enough. Then the Chicago offer arrived. My supervisor called on a Tuesday, a large commercial contract, a new building going up on the north side, 18 months of guaranteed worker rate that was almost double what I was pulling in Brooklyn. The kind of thing that doesn't come twice. He needed an answer within the week. I sat with it for 2 days without telling anyone. What I was going to say was no. I'd made that decision quietly on my own without announcing it. Brooklyn was my city. I'd never wanted to be anywhere else. And now there was Claire, whatever this thing with Claire was becoming, and I wasn't ready to walk away from it. I hadn't told her about the offer yet. I was going to. I just hadn't found the right moment. She found out before I could get there. I don't know how someone in the industry who knew someone the way those things always travel. She knew before I'd said a word, and she made her decision before I could make mine. I noticed it the evening I came into Silver Spoon and the temperature had changed. She was professional, friendly even, but the quality of her attention had shifted a half-degree cooler, a beat slower, the kind of change that most people wouldn't detect. I wasn't most people. I'd been watching her for months. After her tables cleared, I stopped her. "What happened?" I asked. She kept her voice even. "Nothing happened. Claire." She set her tray on the counter. When she turned to face me, her expression had that specific flatness I'd seen once before, the same flatness she'd used to cover the redness in her eyes the night of the diner booth. The face she wore when she'd already decided something hurt too much to show. "You should take the Chicago job," she said. "I wasn't going to." "You should, Jake. It's a good opportunity. You'd be good at it." "That's not what I was going to say." She looked at me for a long moment, then, "What happened between us? I think I needed someone after Brett. I was in a bad place, and you were kind, and things got blurry. I don't want you to pass up something real because of something that was blurry." The word landed like a closed door. I looked at her, straight at her. "You really believe that?" She didn't look away. "Yes." She held the line. Whatever was underneath it, whatever I thought I saw, in the way her jaw had tightened, the way she was holding her own hands together at her sides, like she was keeping herself from doing something else, she didn't let it surface. I stood there for another moment. Then I nodded once. I walked out. The street was cold. I stood on the sidewalk outside Silver Spoon and looked at the lit window and said nothing because there was nothing left to say to a closed door. 2 weeks later, I packed a bag, gave my keys to my neighbor, and drove to Chicago. I told myself she had made her choice and I had to respect it. I told myself that for 2 months. I told it to myself every time I looked at her name on my phone and put the phone face down on the counter. I was so determined to believe her. That was my mistake. Chicago was fine. That was the most honest thing I could say about it. The work was good, technically demanding, well-organized, the kind of job that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied for 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. The crew was solid. My supervisor ran a clean operation. I had a furnished apartment 11 blocks from the site, a diner on the corner that made decent eggs, and absolutely no reason to be miserable. I was miserable anyway. Not loudly. I wasn't the kind of person who let it show at work or made it anyone else's problem. But at night in that quiet apartment with its white walls and its unfamiliar street sounds, I would pick up my phone and find her name and just hold it there. Not calling, not texting, just looking at it like some part of me was waiting for a reason that hadn't arrived yet. I believed what she'd told me. That was the thing. I had looked at her face and heard her voice, and I had believed her because Claire was not a person who said things she didn't mean. That was one of the qualities I had cataloged about her over months of watching. She was honest in the particular way that cost her something. She didn't perform. So I took her at her word. I drove to Chicago. I worked. I told myself the ache in my chest was just the adjustment period, that it would dull down to something manageable eventually. 2 months passed. It didn't dull. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was on the 14th floor of a half-built commercial tower running conduit through a concrete ceiling when my phone buzzed in my chest pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway. "Jake." The voice was female, direct, a little out of breath, like she'd been working herself up to this. "This is Adrienne, Claire's friend. We've never actually met, but I know who you are and I know what happened. And I need about 3 minutes of your time." I kept my hand on the conduit. "Okay." She didn't push you away because she didn't care. Adrienne's voice had the clipped efficiency of someone who had decided to say a hard thing and was not going to let herself stop. She pushed you away because she loves you, and she couldn't figure out how to be worth staying for. That's the actual reason. I've watched her talk herself out of every good thing for the last 3 years, and she did the same thing with you, except this time, what she talked herself out of was real. I didn't say anything. Adrienne kept going. "Brett knows the marriage was fake. I don't know how he found out, but he did. And because Brett is exactly the kind of person you already know he is, he decided that meant she was still in love with him. He's been showing up outside the diner, flowers, messages. She's exhausted, Jake. She doesn't have the energy to fight him off because she used all of it convincing herself she didn't deserve you." The wind off the building frame was cold against my face. "I'm not telling you what to do," Adrienne said, "but I thought you should know what was actually happening because I don't think you do." She hung up. I stood there for a long moment with my phone in my hand and the Chicago skyline spread out below me, and I thought about 2 months of looking at Claire's name on a screen and not pressing call. I thought about her face in Silver Spoon, the night she'd said the word blurry, and the way her jaw had been tight and how she'd held her own hands together at her sides, like she was keeping herself from doing something else. I had looked right at her and believed the wrong thing. I climbed down from the 14th floor, found my supervisor, and told him I needed a few days for a personal situation. He looked at my face and said, "Go." I didn't stop at the apartment for more than 10 minutes. Grabbed my keys, my wallet, a jacket, left everything else where it was. Pulled out of Chicago before noon and pointed the truck east, and for the first time in 2 months, the ache in my chest felt like it had somewhere to go. I drove straight through. 11 hours with one stop for gas and bad coffee, the kind of drive where you don't feel the distance because your head is somewhere else entirely. By the time I crossed back into New York, it was past 11 at night, the bridges lit up gold over black water. The city looking exactly like it always had, like it had been waiting unimpressed for me to come back to my senses. I didn't go to her apartment. It was too late and I didn't want to show up at her door at midnight with 11 hours of highway behind me and nothing figured out. I went to my own place, slept 4 hours on a couch that still smelled like my apartment, and woke up with the particular clarity that comes after you've made a decision you can't unmake. I was at Silver Spoon by 4 in the afternoon. I saw them through the window before I pushed the door open. Claire was behind the counter, still in her uniform end of shift, tired, the kind of tired that lives in the shoulders and around the eyes. She was standing with her arms slightly crossed, the posture of someone who is holding a position rather than a conversation. Brett was on the other side of the counter with flowers. Not a small bunch, an arrangement the kind that takes up space and announces itself. He was talking with the easy confidence of someone who had never really had to fight for anything and had therefore concluded that persistence was the same as effort. Leaning forward, head slightly tilted, performing something. Claire's face was closed. Politely closed, professionally closed, the face she used when she needed to manage a situation without making a scene. But I'd been watching her face for long enough. She wasn't just tired. She was depleted. I pushed the door open. The bell above the frame rang once. Claire looked up. Her mouth opened and then stopped like her brain and her voice had lost the connection. Brett turned around. We looked at each other. He recovered faster than I would have given him credit for. "Hey," his voice was careful. "You're Jake, right from the wedding." "That's right," I said. I walked to the counter and stood beside Claire. Not in front of her, beside her. I wasn't there to make a scene or win a standoff. I was there because she was exhausted and she shouldn't have to handle this alone. Brett's eyes moved between us. Something was recalculating behind them. "I heard the marriage was a setup," he said. Not aggressive, almost conversational, like he was presenting evidence. "A favor for the wedding, so I figured—" "You figured wrong," I said. He looked at me steadily. "The whole thing was fake." "At first, yeah." I kept my voice level. "She needed someone to walk into a hard room with her, and I said yes. That part was an arrangement." I let that sit for a moment. But I was in love with her before we ever drove to Connecticut. The arrangement was the cover. Everything underneath it was real. It stopped being fake for me a long time before it stopped looking fake from the outside. Brett's jaw moved. He was working through something reassessing. Claire had gone very still beside me. Brett looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not exactly hurt, more like a man who has realized the game he thought he was playing was a different game entirely. He set the flowers on the counter. Didn't slam them, didn't make it dramatic, just put them down. Okay, he said quietly. He buttoned his coat. Okay. He walked to the door. The bell rang again and he was gone and the diner was suddenly very quiet. For a long moment neither of us spoke. One of the other servers had found something very important to do in the back. The one remaining customer at the far table was staring at his phone, with the focused intensity of someone pretending they hadn't just witnessed something. Claire turned to face me. Her eyes were wet, not spilling, just full. Jake, you don't have to explain tonight, I said. I'm not here for an explanation. I want to give you one. Her voice was steady, but it cost something to keep it that way. What I said to you, that it was blurry, that you were just there at the right time, I knew it wasn't true when I said it. I knew it the whole time. I told myself it was protecting you, that you had this opportunity and I'd be the reason you turned it down and then eventually you'd resent me for it. That it was better to end it clean. I waited. But it wasn't protecting you, she said. It was protecting me because if you stayed and it didn't work, that would have meant something about me I wasn't ready to face. So I made the decision for you before you could make it for yourself, and that was wrong. I know it was wrong. I should have pushed harder, I said. I looked right at you and I believed the wrong thing. I knew something was off. I saw it on your face. And I walked out anyway because I didn't want to be the guy who doesn't hear the word no. It wasn't no, she said quietly. It was fear. I know that now. She looked at me for a long moment. You drove from Chicago. Last night, 11 hours. Something moved through her face, surprise, then something softer and more complicated. You didn't call. I didn't know what I wanted to say until I was standing here, I said. Some things don't work on the phone. She laughed once short and unsteady and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a second. When she lowered it, her eyes were still wet, but something had opened in her expression that hadn't been there before. I don't know how to do this, right? She said. I've been bad at it. I've been really bad at it. So have I said. We can be bad at it together and figure it out as we go. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached out and took my hand the same way I'd taken hers in the diner booth months ago, quietly before she could talk herself out of it. Okay, she said. That was all, just okay. But it was the most solid thing I'd heard in 2 months. We didn't solve everything that night. That's not how it works, and I think we both knew it. What we did was sit in the back booth of Silver Spoon after her shift ended and talk honestly for the first time, without anything in the way, no performance, no cover story, no version of ourselves that was built for someone else's benefit. She told me about the weeks after I left, how Brett had shown up, how she'd been too worn down to feel anything about it except tired. I told her about Chicago, the white walls, the decent eggs, the phone I kept picking up and putting back down. We talked about the practical things too because they were real and they mattered. The Chicago contract was 18 months. I wasn't going to walk away from it entirely. That would have been its own kind of mistake, trading one version of self-erasure for another. But I could negotiate short-term rotations. 3 weeks on site, 1 week home. It wasn't perfect. It required more planning than either of us was used to. But it was something we could build on, rather than something either of us had to sacrifice. She had something she hadn't told me yet. For almost a year, she'd been putting money aside, small amounts, inconsistently, the way you do when you have a dream you're not quite ready to say out loud. She wanted to open a cafe, not a diner. Something smaller, warmer. A neighborhood place in Brooklyn where she could make the decisions and know the regulars by name. She'd found a space on a corner in Carroll Gardens that was coming available in the spring. She'd been too scared to take the next step alone. I looked at her across the booth. Tell me about the electrical needs, I said. She stared at me. What? The space. Old building or new? Because if it's old, you're probably looking at a full panel upgrade before you can run a commercial kitchen. Her expression moved through several things in quick succession: confusion, then comprehension, then something that broke open quietly into something else entirely. You'd help me with that, she asked. I'd do the whole build out, I said. Every outlet, every fixture, I know what I'm doing. She was quiet for a moment looking at the table. Then she looked back up at me. Corner light, she said. That's what I want to call it, because of the way the afternoon light comes through the windows on that corner. Corner light, I repeated. That's a good name. She nodded slowly like she was hearing it for the first time and deciding it was true. The cafe opened on a Thursday in April 6 months later. Claire had chosen every surface and every piece of furniture, warm wood mismatched chairs, a long counter with stools along the window where the afternoon light came through exactly the way she described. I had done every wire, every switch, every pendant light that hung above the tables in the warm-tone clusters she'd drawn out on a napkin and handed to me like a blueprint. It looked like her. That was the only way I knew how to describe it. The whole place looked like the inside of how she saw things. The first day was a full one a line. Before we opened a steady crowd through the afternoon, Claire moving behind the counter with the ease of someone who had been doing this in her imagination for long enough that the reality had somewhere to land. I watched her from a corner table for about an hour before she caught me and pointed a finger. You're supposed to be helping. I'm observing, I said. Quality control. She threw a dish towel at me. I caught it. The regulars who had already formed in a single day the beginning of regulars looked on with mild amusement. That night, after the last customer had gone, and the door was locked, and the chairs were up on most of the tables, I found my phone and pulled up a playlist. Claire was wiping down the counter still in her apron hair, coming loose the way it always did by the end of a long shift. The first notes of the slow song filled the room. She looked up. It was the same song. Exactly the same one. The song from the reception in Connecticut, the one we danced to while the pretending quietly became something else. I walked to the counter and held out my hand. The husband, I said, would like to dance with his wife. She looked at my hand for a moment. Then she untied her apron, set it on the counter, and placed her hand in mine. We moved slowly between the tables in the warm light of the pendants I had wired and the corner light that had given the place its name. Her head came to rest against my shoulder the same way it had the first time, like it had always known where it was going. After a while, she tilted her face up toward mine. Is this still fake? She asked. I pulled her closer. It was never fake, I said. Not for a single minute. She tucked her head back against my shoulder and we kept moving slow and unhurried in the place we had built together from the ground up. The story started with a lie. But lies that come from fear have a strange quality when you hold them up to the light sometimes. What's underneath them is the most honest thing you've ever said. That's what happened to us. And I wouldn't change a minute of it.